Okay. Well, so what day omnes? Be well, all of you. Welcome back to the Common Latin Podcast. Jennifer and Timothy are not able to join us today, so you get me instead. We have Kathy Donegia, who's here all the time. She's a wonderful curriculum developer and author of the Common Latin for Classical Conversations. And we also have two of our academic team members, Deb Schweitzer and Babs Harrell, who've both tested Common Latin in their communities this past year. So they have more experience with students. And I'm so glad you're with us for this episode. That's episode number 5, being filmed on July 15th, 2026. And just thank you, everybody, for taking an interest in Latin in the middle of this hot summer. So last week in episode 4, we talked about task 3, memorizing vocabulary. We made flashcards for the nouns and verbs in John 3:16, and Kathy walked us through the Latin flashcards. Show them the CC method, read it, flip it, say it, and keep working the stack until every card is on the table. But today we're going to move on to task 4, practice forms. And this is the task where all that vocabulary starts to move. A word like mundus is not just a word to translate. It changes shape depending on its job in the sentence. So today we're going to learn why that matters and how a simple noun chart teaches a student to recognize a Latin word no matter what form it takes. So Kathy, what did I even mean when I said practice forms?
Practice forms, yeah. I think when we think of practice forms, what we're really talking about are those charts that we've done with Henley Latin. And I'm sure a lot of you have studied some Latin, and even in foundations, we memorize those charts of endings. So the form is a version of the word that is changed in some way. In Latin, nouns change forms to show number and case, and verbs change forms to show person, number, tense, voice, and mood. In English, we don't really change our forms that much, but we do a little. So like if I said dog or dogs, what did I do? Well, I added an S on the end of one to make it plural. But we don't really change forms with nouns in English to show their job in the sentence. But that's what the forms are going to do for Latin nouns. We do see forms change a little bit more with pronouns. So I always tell my students, how do we use the word I? We use it as a subject, and we use me as an object, and we use my as a possessive. So pronouns actually retain some of those cases in that they change forms based on their use in a sentence. And Latin does this all the time, as you know, if you've studied any Latin. It is really fun to try to figure out those forms. The charts that we use are simply all of those forms laid out in a chart form so that the student can then memorize a little piece of it. They can see the whole pattern, but then they can start to memorize each, like, for example, each declension ending.
Great. So let me talk about why I found the charts helpful. You know, when I did the Essentials program decades ago, I made a lot of charts, and partly it was because I was studying Latin already and saw the value of the Latin charts. One of the things I realized is that everything's cultural. And so now I understood why in English, when we do the same thing as Latin, like say actors and actresses, that we have gender, or dogs and dog, like you just pointed out, that we have number. The charts of Latin really helped me to understand my mother tongue. So to me, that's the main reason why I studied Latin. But we use these charts not just to memorize and forget them. The charts are like a map you can bring with you throughout your life. So even now, if you ask me to diagram, hopefully you aren't right now, a Latin sentence, I would pull out my charts. I would still rely on them because I've never been so thoroughly immersed in Latin that I have it all memorized and at my fingertips. But I do know how to use the charts. And what I find interesting about that is that I travel a lot all over the world. I was just in Brazil where they speak Portuguese. And once again, I could read what they were writing. I couldn't speak it, but I could read it because I had the gist of the charts down, as well as like a basic conversational vocabulary from Latin. So those are some of the reasons I like charts. They also can give structure to the information our students are studying. In other words, in one way, you could say we're crippling them because they don't have to go make their own charts, go figure out why does this system work the way it does. But that's because we know they're children, and by giving them grammar, the charts put together for them, their brain has a place to hang the bigger ideas that connect to the charts. It would be wonderful if all of us could be like Mr. Bowditch in our book here on Mr. Bowditch, and learn Latin so that we can study math, which is what he did. But in our case, we go ahead and give the students help because we are trying to teach them pedagogy, how to learn anything. And so for me, the charts are that beginning spot where it's a simple single page. It's easy to kind of get into your eidetic memory. Singulars on the left, plurals on the right. What were those endings again? It just shows an organized world. The language is an organized way of thinking and speaking. And of course, the Lord would not leave us in a place of chaos. So surely there's a pattern and there's understanding to all of the language that we speak, in spite of the Tower of Babel, which I'd like to do a whole lecture on sometime. Okay, on to you.
Yeah, that was wonderful. I agree with everything you said about charts. That's one of the ways I learned Latin myself. It was I would make my own charts. And of course, I had the time to do that as an adult. I agree that with children, it's good to give them the chart and then help them attend to it. And that's, those are some of the skills that we practice together when we work on charts, is they're using those 15 skills of learning again. So they're not just memorizing the chart, they're also comparing, they're attending to different parts of it, expressing it as they copy a chart. So lots of ways that they use those charts. I think in the first or second week, we talked about the Latin catechism. And one of the catechism rules that we learned was that Latin has 4 attributes. Latin nouns have 4 attributes: declension, gender, number, and case. And task 4 is where the student finally sees that rule in action, because we're dealing with the different declensions on the chart. We're dealing with singular, plural. The chart includes the genders. And then we actually see those endings for the different cases. So, and then it brings in that skill of expressing as they start to use those for copying or for even declining nouns. So it's pretty good.
Yeah, you made me think of a whole bunch more things we could say about charts. So let me just say I'm glad to have them.
Yeah, very good. Very good. I think we'll move on and we'll let you see one of them.
Okay. Yeah, we'll let Deb and Babs walk through one. Is that where we're headed next?
Yeah, so I think what we're going to do is talk a little bit first about what we see here and what the task 4 actually encompasses, because task 4 includes 2 parts to it. The first part is just the copywork. Each week shows the lesson, shows the whole chart, and it has just a portion of it highlighted. You can kind of see that on here. The noun-adjective chart is faded in the background, but that's the whole chart. And then the portion that the students are working on for this lesson is popped out so they can focus right there. And so the student would copy and recite just the highlighted part, the part that's popped out, not the entire chart at once at first. And I think, though, seeing the whole really makes a difference. I think seeing all of your declension endings on one page, to me, is super, super helpful, because it's like you said, Leigh, it's like a map. So you can tell where you are, but then you can zoom in and focus on just one little portion of it. And then over the weeks, students will learn each little portion of the chart until by the end of the semester, they can do probably the whole chart from memory. And so do you have anything to add before we move on?
No, I really like how this slide looks. And this is right out of a page from the curriculum, correct?
Yes, this is out of a page from the curriculum. And you can see this is the first portion of task 4, which is attend to the chart. That's the first thing we always do, is we attend and then locate. So as we're attending, we're going to locate the portion of the chart that we need, and then you just practice it and memorize it. So I think we're going to walk through that. We're going to walk through this with Deb and Babs. And Deb, I think you can walk us through how you would lead a student through attending to this chart. Now, I've zoomed in on it. I only have the top portion of the chart right here. for us.
Okay, great. Sure. So let's just start by attending to the top of the chart. And what do you guys just see? What's similar and different between the columns of just this portion of the chart?
So the tops, like the light gray, I guess, is telling you the declension.
Mm-hmm.
Breaking
So we
it
can
up
see
into declension.
Yeah, so we have first declension and then second declension, and we have two columns for second declension. So what's different between those two columns with the second declension?
An M
There's
and
a
an
letter.
Yes. One letter, right? Just one little letter. Yeah, and so that M, we would definitely ask our students to recognize that the M means masculine in that section. And then in the third column, that N would mean neuter, right? And so we have two different ones. But so Babs, we're going to walk through this second declension masculine noun, right? So we would find that on our column. So the first thing we would do is we would say, can we find the column that's second declension masculine, and make sure our students can even locate it, right? That's a great skill that we're developing. We're helping them see arrangement and how to locate and attend those things. All right. So Babs, could you say the second declension masculine endings for me? Could you read them down the chart?
Yes, I'm fighting the urge to not sing a song.
Yeah.
Us, e, o, o is the singular.
Mm-hmm.
And then plural.
Yep, go ahead.
Okay. E, orum, is, os, is.
Okay. And so if anybody's been through foundations, they already have songs flying through their head. But let's say that one more time, Babs. So go ahead and say them again, nice and slow.
Okay. Singular, us, e, o, o. And plural, e, orum, is, os, is.
Great. So we've repeated that twice. So now I'm going to see how much you can remember. So without looking, so you get to close your eyes, Babs. See if you can say those second declension masculine endings from memory.
Us, e, o, o is singular. And plural is e, orum, is, os, is.
Bravo. All right, good job. So, and this is when we recognize that the brilliance of the foundations memory work, right? Because if you've gone through foundations, we can all memorize those, but the foundations memory song is going to have us going through jingle bells and singing that likely. So if I was at home and I had students, like I had some younger ones and some older ones combined, we would probably sing the foundation song and we'd be going, O-C-O-M-O, E-orm, is, os, is, right? And we would be remembering that and calling that from our memory. And then I would probably just ask my students to, possibly write them down, fill in a blank chart, or fill in a blank workspace that we have for this. And then you can get creative too. So I've done things like make the endings on flashcards and see if they can just, mix them up and say, can you guys put them in order on the table and have the olders help the youngers? There's a way to just keep reviewing. And then once they get them in order, you can have them say it again and point to it as they are putting those little flashcard endings in order. But we can do a lot of different things to even compare. So the lovely thing about this chart is that you can see this first, second, and second all together right there across the top. So I could say, let's compare what's the same and what's different between the masculine and the neuter, or compare it to the first declension, and what's different and what's the same. And so we would be able to compare our endings and have review at the same time that we're learning those new endings. So let's do that. Let's compare the second declension masculine endings to the first declension endings. Do you guys see any similarities or anything that you notice between the first declension and the second declension?
It looks like singular is the same except for the us and the
Okay, so we have here for the masculine and the neuter, right? We have an us and we have an right? What else is a little bit different?
In the plural, the masculine has e, and the neuter has or ah.
Ah, right. So we have that long I sound, which is an E in Latin. And then here we have an ah. So that would be something that we could distinguish. as well as it's here in the accusative, right? If we kept looking, we would see os here for the masculine accusative plural, and here we have an ah. So we can also maybe note that the ah is the same here between these in the plural form for the neuter. So there's little things that we can discover by copying, by playing, by comparing. So having those all together on one chart is really helpful.
I was going to say the nominative and the accusative match each other in both singular and plural in the neuter second declension.
Yeah, Nicole, that's great, right? So we see that and the ah and the ah. And so that's a great little tidbit to bring out to our students as well. Hey, those are always going to be matching. So we then get to figure out which job it has in the sentence. We'll have to spend a little time figuring that out, right? Is it going to be the nominative? Is it the subject? Or is it the accusative? Is it the direct object? So we can have some fun as we see those words in action and those endings in action in the scripture. So, Leigh, do you have any insights or things that you've seen there?
So I'd like to suggest a game for your early readers. If you notice, it's it's 6 columns by 5 rows. You could make that into like a bingo kind of chart and then have the flashcards we've made or have the students make them themselves. And, I can just see my grandchildren saying Oram and making granddad put a marker on Oram. And then my grandchild reading East and granddad putting a marker on East. And even though everyone has the same set of cards, the kids just like making grown-ups do things. Well, let's let them make us do Latin so that they learn the Latin and the pronunciations.
That's awesome. I love that idea. So the kids always love to, or even like the older students, right? If they have an older sibling, they would love to do that with them as well. The more the younger ones get to do that, the happier they are. So that's great.
That's really good. Deb, you did a great job leading us through the top part of this chart. So if there are no other comments, I think what we'll do next is let's look at the second part of task 4, which is the chart activities. Again, this is a page out of the curriculum. And so the chart activities are where the student applies what they've just learned about those endings, and they apply it with nouns. They're going to decline nouns, right? So that's a very common activity that we do. If we were in a verb chapter, a verb lesson, they would probably conjugate the verb or do some comparison with verbs. And this is really where Latin grammar stops being so abstract, because instead of just a list of endings, you now see it on words. And I think that's really fun. The student isn't just reciting in isolation. They can actually recite real words.
Yeah. It's kind of like piano scales where, you have to kind of just learn those scales and get your muscle memory kind of going to be able to not just play a scale one day, but to be able to play a concerto, you would have to need to know those scales. And when we have these chart endings, they might feel like scales, that we're just practicing them. But once we start to put them on those vocabulary words and we're playing those scales, eventually we're going to recognize those in the fluency of scripture. And then that's where we're going to be able to just start to translate a little more on the fly, because we have that rhythm kind of established, just like we established scales and learning how to play the piano.
That makes me think about basketball. So my son was a big basketball player. And in the beginning, the coach was making sure they were running and dribbling and passing and shooting, and they had drills, but then it became second nature. And so I think the more that our students do these over and over again and start reciting the words with those endings, it will become just like the basketball. It'll be like second nature.
Yeah, that's super good, Babs. I like that analogy with basketball. Let's go ahead and practice some of these. And Babs, I'll lead you through, and I'm going to try to do it with the PowerPoint without having to write on it. But let's demonstrate how we could use this. So first of all, our working verse for this, for the first part of this series is John 3:16. And actually 3 of the nouns in John 3:16 are second declension nouns. So we've got filius, mundus, and deus. And they're all second declension masculine. So I'm going to walk you through how to decline mundus, world, in a way a parent might do this with a student at home. So Babs, mundus mundi is a second declension noun, it's masculine. So the first step we do when we're declining is we find the stem. And so you find the stem by dropping the genitive singular ending. So first of all, from your chart, what is the genitive singular ending?
So that would be E, the I with the macron?
Yeah, I with a macron, pronounced E. And so if you dropped that from the genitive, now when it says mundus mundi, we've learned previously that this would have been in a previous lesson that mundus is the nominative, mundi is the genitive. So how would you spell the stem of mundus once you drop the I?
Just M-U-N-D. M-U-N-D.
Yeah, M-U-N-D. So that's our stem. And then what we're going to do is we are going to place the endings onto mundus. I'll do the singular for you, and then I'll let you do the plural. So the singular would be mundus, and you see I'm just putting the US on it, mundi, mundo, mundum, and mundo. So can you do the plural?
All right, E, or E's, O's, E's. Mundi, mundorum, mundis, mundos, mundis.
Very good, very good. Now, if I were sitting right beside of you, we would be doing this on a whiteboard or in the workspace or on paper and actually writing it out as well as saying it. So yeah, that was really good. Now, can you decline the whole word, just the whole chart in singular
Decline.
and plural? Yeah, in other
just
words.
like say them?
Yeah, just say them.
Okay. E-O-M-O. Mundus, mundi, mundo, mundum, mundo, singular, and plural, E-O-R-M, E's, O's, E's. Mundi, mundorum, mundis, mundos, mundis.
That is excellent. That's exactly like a student would do it. They would be reciting those endings again and then trying to place it on the end of the word. It's kind of hard to do it on the fly, isn't it?
Well, I was thinking, I think it would be easier for me. Now, this is probably just a personal thing, but I think it would be easier for me to write it than say it. So like when you had it where it's blank, I was thinking if I wrote it, I think I could do it faster or easier. But now that I have to do it out loud, I think it's a different part of my brain. And so it took me a little bit longer, and I was having to do the, endings in my head too.
Yeah, I agree. And I like to have the chart right beside me when I'm declining too. Like if I had an exercise that said decline this word, I might go ahead and write my endings out beside the exercise. And then even though I know them, us, e, o, o, writing them out, I think it uses a different skill in your brain to where you can write it out. You can add those endings easier.
Hey, Kathy, we have a burning question. Can you answer this? Because I don't know how to answer it. They're wondering about the macrons being used here when we've been told the Vulgate doesn't use them. So what are we doing? What's going on?
Yeah, that's a great question. So what we've done with the curriculum, we know that the Vulgate doesn't use macrons, but macrons can be important for both pronunciation and in some ways to distinguish. For example, to distinguish the difference between a second conjugation and a third conjugation verb, that that macron changes the pronunciation and makes a big difference. So we're using macrons on the in the vocabulary lists, and we're using them in the charts so that students can get used to those and get used to a better pronunciation. Does that help?
Yeah, so maybe think of it like this. When I was growing up, we had this thing called dictionaries that had the syllabic pronunciation right next to the word. And you would read that, which had all these symbols in it that were not in the word, and in order to help you pronounce it correctly. So think of this as an abbreviated pronunciation dictionary, so that when you get to the Vulgate, you have a chance of saying it. Maybe not correctly. We're not all in ancient Rome, but certainly in a way our community is all expressing it.
Yeah, very good, very good.
Kathy,
Amber
can I ask a question?
Yeah, sure. And then I'll comment more on Amber.
I guess see if this is okay, because I was thinking one thing that I did in my Vulgate copy is I added the macrons as I knew them. Like as as words came into vocabulary, I would take my copy. Now, not my Bible, because I don't write in my Bible. I'm weird like that. But like my Vulgate copy, I actually put the macrons over it. So is that okay to do? That wouldn't confuse anybody, would it?
No, that's good. That's okay to do if you know where they are. Yeah, it helps you read it out loud because it helps you with the pronunciation.
The other thing I like about that is it's forcing this child to do a close reading of every word. So, you don't want to do that all the time. That would torture them. But to make sure they're doing it sometimes, or maybe on the words they're struggling with.
Yeah, very good. Good. Amber says, she said she didn't know how we would distinguish verbs. So a verb, this is a little bit off topic, but a verb like mito-miteri, the accent changes because that's a third declension verb. Those of you who know Latin, it's a third conjugation verb, which means the E does not have a macron in the ERE ending. So mito-miteri, whereas a second conjugation verb like teneo tenere, you're going to lengthen and accent the E in the ERE. So the pronunciation is different. Teneo tenere versus mito-miteri. And we do point that out in the curriculum. Good. Okay, so I think we can move on if there's no more questions, and we'll have time for questions at the end also. So Babs, what I think we're going to try to do now is we're going to do another noun, and this time we're going to do filius. Let's see if I can get there. We go. Okay, so first thing, Babs, is what is the stem of filius? Use the same process. Drop the I from the genitive.
So would it be F-I-L-I?
Yeah, it would be F-I-L-I. Don't get confused because there's two I's on the end of that word. You drop the genitive ending, which is the long I. And so your stem is F-I-L-I. Okay, now, do you think you can decline filius?
Okay, let's see. F-I-L-I. Filius, filii, filio, filium, filio. Filii, filiorum, filiis, filios, filiis.
Very good. Can you do it with, well, you actually did it without me even pulling the words up for you to read. Can you do it now without the chart, though? Try it.
Okay. Us-E-O-M-O. So filius, filii, filio, filium, filio. Us-E-O-M-O. Right? Is that right? Okay.
Yeah.
And then eorum, esos, es. Filii, filiorum, filiis, filios, filiis.
Very good. You did it.
Yay.
Awesome. That was great. So Leigh and Deb, I'm curious, as you watched us walk through those chart activities. First, we practiced just the chart, and then we actually did the activity, which was declining the nouns. I just wonder what you noticed about that whole process or the pedagogy of that. I know we've talked about it a little bit.
Go ahead, Debs.
I thought it was neat to watch Babs think. Like we have the pleasure of seeing her on the screen, so you could see her going O before each time she would start to decline. So she was going to that canon of memory and recalling it before she was doing it. So the first time she was always being able to reference the charts so she could look at that, kind of recall, and then bring those things to memory and decline. But by the time you pulled that, like it's a little scary when you pull when you pull the chart away, you're like, oh no. So I love having the charts there. But once the chart's pulled away, it's amazing. It's like the catechism, right? Once we have that in our memory, we can pull on that from our memory. And she was able to still decline and bring that noun all the way through, even with that tricky filii, like that extra I in there. She was still able to go all the way through it. So I loved seeing that canon of memory being used so actively in the declining of the noun.
That's good.
Yes.
That's really good.
I would just say, Babs, I just love you so much. I've done so many things with you over the last few years. And just to see how you loved your students and your children so much that you paid attention to how they learn. And so what you're modeling for us is exactly what we would hope parents would do with a struggling child at home. Because in an hour once a week, we can't do this. We can just go over the main things and model a few examples. And then that's another thing that you're doing so well is if our tutors would just do what you just did, their students actually would engage and embrace what's going on rather than feel like it's too much information being thrown at them. So I just appreciate that you understand pedagogy, how the brain works, and you're apparently comfortable doing it in front of a live audience.
I needed a lot of prayer before this call. I'll just tell you that. I asked for a lot of prayer.
You know your endings so well, though. You were able to apply them pretty easily. I thought you did a great job. I want to mention one little thing about pronunciation, because we are trying to work on pronunciation a little bit. When we do these charts, our tendency is to emphasize the ending, which is awesome. Like filius, filii, filio, filium, filio, because we're practicing our endings. If you saw these words and pronounce these words within the context of a verse, you would actually accent them a little differently. You're not going to emphasize that ending the same way. So it would be filius, filii, filio, filium, filio, filii, filiorum, filiis, filios, and filiis. That's just a little tidbit for fun. Good. Let's see. Leigh, do you have any final thoughts with this before we move on to our verse?
No, I want to go ahead and I love getting right to the translating. So why don't you go ahead and read John 3:16 for us?
Let's
move
do it.
on.
Let me get there. Yes, let me get there. Here we go. Sic enim Deus dilexit mundum, ut filium suum unigenitum daret, ut omnis qui credet in eum, non pereat, sed habeat vitam aeternam. And it's John 3:16. And so what I thought we'd do is look for those second declension nouns. And as we find them, think about your chart. I don't have the chart on the screen here. Think about your chart and see if you can tell me what declension they are. So, Deb, do you see any?
I think the first one stands out to me is the word mundum. So it's mundus, mundi. So that's a second declension noun. It would be, so that would be singular, right? So I would be able to see that it's singular and it's got that ending. So that would be, so us, e-o, or o, so that's accusative. So it would be world, but it's got to be acting as the direct object. So, and that works because God so loved what? God so loved the world.
Yeah, that's super good. And you knew from, if we were working through this whole lesson, you would have known from the vocabulary that that's a second declension masculine noun because you memorized that. And then the part you can figure out from the um ending is exactly like you did. It's the accusative singular. And then later in this lesson, we're going to talk about syntax. That'll be for next week. And we'll talk about what the job is of the accusative case, which is direct objects. You did that really well. And of course, we're looking at the verse right now because we want to get to the translating part, right? This is actually part of task 6 to parse and translate. Task 4 really shouldn't take a whole lot of time because it's just going to be practicing your charts and applying it using those activities, 10 or 15 minutes of that. But it's so fun to dig into the verse, right? Babs, do you see anything else? Oh, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I think it's kind of fun to see that mundum and filium, they both have the same endings when you compare those. So, because they're right next to each other. So you know that you have, once you know one's in the accusative, you know the other one's going to be in the accusative too. So it's just kind of neat to see those exact same endings with two nouns right next to each other.
Yeah, that's super good. And you see that ending. Do you see it on other words in the verse also?
Suum.
Yes.
Unit.
Yes, that's my question for you, Kathy. How do I not confuse the prepositions with the second declensions?
Okay.
I mean, pronouns, sorry.
Pronouns with the second declension. Well, so we haven't learned adjectives yet, right? If we think about this verse in English, what I would start with is just comparing it to the English. So we know that this verse is, for God so loved the world, and there's our direct object, loved what? Mundum, the world, that he gave his only begotten son. So his only begotten Son. So we really have two adjectives in English describing the Son. It's his Son, his own Son, and he is an only begotten Son. And so that leads me to believe, if I were comparing to this, it would lead me to believe that suum and unigenitum, they have that same noun ending, but they are adjectives.
Well, and just for clarity for people who are new to this, they are adjectives, but they are pronoun adjectives. His,
Yes.
hers,
Yes.
its, theirs, right?
Yeah. And they'll get to that. They'll actually get to that in, I think, the next lesson in this.
So right
which
now,
will
if
be
a
going through
student
lessons.
if a student said me and sum and eum and unigenitum, you could say, great, you're right. They have the same endings. We'll do them another time. Is that what you're
Exactly
suggesting?
right. That's what I suggest. Yeah, because we're dealing with, as students are reading these verses, especially a first-time Latin student, there are going to be a lot of words that they are not going to know. And that's where comparison is so helpful, because they can compare it to the English. And then I think they'll be really curious. Well, I wonder which of these words means only begotten. I wonder if we can match it up and see if we can figure that out. And that might be a fun word that they remember. Have you, Babs, I see you shaking your head. Have you had that experience with your kids?
Yeah, I remember in class basically saying, "You're right, it has the same ending. We'll get to that later." Like, I remember telling them that, because it was like we hadn't gotten to adjectives yet, so they wouldn't know. But I think the cool thing, what I took away from what you guys were just saying, was those two endings they came after filium, but they describe filium, right? So they're still connected in some way. It's just we haven't gotten to, the adjective part yet. So
That's great. That's great. I think it's okay as a parent too, or even as a tutor. I do this and I say, you know what? I don't know. Let's try to find out, or let's go look something up, or let's look ahead in the book, or maybe we'll get to that next week if I'm working ahead of my kids and know that. Yeah, super good.
Well, the other thing that you have as a parent at home and even the tutor is you don't have one sentence. So they picked them out really quickly, or there's only one or two in the sentence. Go do the next sentence and the next sentence and the next sentence, and don't even care what the sentence is saying. Just have the child look for those endings.
Yeah, look for those endings and look for the vocabulary words. One of the things you'll notice is this is pointing out how important it is to actually decline those nouns so that you see that word in all 10 of its forms. Because if I see mundum, I might make the connection that that's mundus, but I might not. I might be looking for mundus. And so that'll become even more important when we get to third declension and the spellings change. Yeah,
one of the easy words that I picked out was deus, and I thought it was easier because we just did the singular of the masculine. So I thought that was a little bit easier, because if I go back and look at my chart and I see that us was nominative and it was part of that second declension singular, that helps me because I know the verse is God so loved the world. So I know that's the subject. So that just kind of reiterates for me what we just practiced, learning those endings and what goes with what. So
yeah, that's good. That's really good. You can also do a little bit of review work when you're working on your verses like this, because the previous lesson would have been first declension nouns. Do you see any first declension nouns in this verse?
Weedum?
Yeah, very good. Weetum, which means, you know what it means?
Life?
Life, yeah.
It means vitamin water.
Yeah, there you go. Vitamins give us life. Yeah. We cannot have life without vitamins. I also think of the word vitality. And then what ending do you think is on we, Tom? Some of you who you can answer in the chat or answer out loud. Anybody who remembers their first declension endings?
Accusative singular.
Yeah, very good. Accusative singular. Excellent. So I thought next, any other questions or comments about the verse before we move on?
I have one question. Deus only declines in the singular, correct?
You can decline it in the plural.
You can.
When it means the one true God, it's only in the singular because we only have one God. Even in the Vulgate, though, you'll see it used in the plural when it's talking about the pagan gods or the Roman mythological gods. So yeah, you can use it in the plural. Good. That was a great question. Okay.
Is a good clue for that it's capitalized? Like if it's not capitalized, it would be talking about the gods, not deity, not the one true God.
Exactly. Just like we would do in English.
Kathy, there's a question in the chat about that says, will the tours 1 through 3 use the same verses each week?
So by the way, if you haven't watched episode 1, it's already up on YouTube. We do a big overview of all the tasks and all the parts of the curriculum. So that's going to help you if you haven't seen it. But, I dropped the question. Tell me the question again, Babs.
Will tours 1 through 3 use the same verses each week?
Gotcha. So what is assigned in the curriculum is whole chapters. And obviously, a first-year Latin student is not going to read a whole chapter. So, for example, 1 week might have Genesis 1, Genesis 2, Genesis 3, and Genesis 4 for each of the 4 days. And what the parent then has to decide to do is how many verses are they going to work through that week? How many verses are going to be appropriate for the levels of experience that their children have? And so for a beginning of the year where we're at right now, an early lesson, you might read 1, 2, or 3 verses together and then try to parse some things out. As you progress through the tours, by the time you're in tour 4 or tour 5 through the curriculum, you're getting faster and you're getting better at maybe reading a whole chapter. Have you noticed that with older kids, Deb? Because you had challenge 2 last year. How many could they get through?
They could get through quite a few. I think the challenge is just ensuring that they're still doing it at home versus just doing it in our seminar time. But we would take a chapter and we would look through like maybe 15 verses and we would read them all aloud together because we tried to just create that pattern of we're going to read. And then we would also learn how to read it better if we read it together in unison and tried to put emphasis in the right places. So we would do about 15 verses in the upper levels, like reading them aloud together just to kind of create that pattern.
Yeah, good. Very good. Great question.
Yeah. And I want to add, Deb, and you could do that, Deb, because you knew Latin well enough yourself. Mm-hmm. If you're a new tutor and you only get through 5 sentences in the seminar, as long as you're modeling these tasks, you're doing your job very well. So, and one of the things I enjoyed doing was over the course of a year, as I got to know my students, to actually challenge them, because sometimes the parents weren't sure how to direct them. And so I might say to my better students in Latin, I need you to come back with 10 sentences translated, but you only need to do 5 this week. And boy, when that kid who could do 5, I looked at him and said a few weeks later, you can do 6. Like they knew they had done something and they'd known that it was an improvement against their own abilities, not the student who already could do 10 or 15. So that's a way a tutor can help them figure out what their own challenges are and assess for themselves.
I can say too that one of the things we do in the guide assignments that you'll see when it comes out is give the tutor a single verse that they can use as an example to use in community. And then it's up to the parents at home to choose the verses, to maybe start at the beginning of the chapter, maybe skim through a whole page of verses and look for second-declension nouns, right? How many second-declension nouns can we find on this page? So that sort of thing.
Also, if your tutor is struggling or is new, she can do the sentence of the day, and then for review, go back and do the last few weeks. Do it again with the students, because if they're all learning right from the beginning, sometimes they can't do a whole bunch at once. So, so the model sentences can be used multiple ways.
It's also good for them to watch you struggle too, right? So as a tutor, when you're up there and you're massacring the translation or massacring the reading it aloud and massacring the translation, and you get it all wrong, and you have that one really bright student who goes, I don't think you have that right, Mrs. Schweitzer, and you're like, you know what, you're right. And it's good, right? It's good for them to see us wrestle with it, that we're learning it right alongside with them, it actually motivates them, I think, to be involved because they're like, you're working on it too. And so it's always helpful to just be like, yep, we're all working on it together.
That's really good, Deb. I like that. It kind of leads into what we're going to talk about next that we've already covered a lot of in the conversations we've been having is what does task 4 in particular look like at home? We've talked about the bingo game and we've talked about flashcard games and whiteboards. What are some other ideas that you all have?
I think at home, copywork, I think we've already talked about that. That's a great thing to do, especially, there's going to be that workspace, which is good, but you don't even have to have the workspace. You can just use a notebook and copy and say it aloud as you're copying. I find that doing the oral and the written together at the same time. So say, slow down, and while you're copying it, say it. So, us, e, o, so that they're connecting the letters with what they're actually saying, because that just kind of builds up both at the same time. Doing like the fun games that we talked about, things like that at home with the charts as well. But I definitely like connecting the oral and the written together at home when I'm doing it with my son.
That's a really good tip. And you demonstrated so well how to actually attend to the chart and compare and work through the endings. But that's a great extra tip there. Any other
We like
thoughts?
to play the dice game at home, where you roll the dice and then whatever number comes up, you have to quickly decline the noun of the declension it belongs to. Or like summertime is a great travel season. And so anytime we can find a church or a government building, we try and as a family translate all of the Latin that we see.
Nice.
I love that.
It's really great. Any other thoughts?
Well, apparently I'm supposed to say perseverance conquers, which is perseverantia and wink it. I'm going to try it again. Perseverantia, wink it. Perseverance conquers. One stem, one ending, 1 week at a time, maybe in a day at a time. And by the end of, this is why we call it a tour. It is really truly a map. You're not going to see all of Rome in a day. If you do, you didn't learn a thing. And it's the same way here. So I would think this is where perseverance for a parent is something that's super familiar with them, is that we truly are showing you in these videos that this is a Bible study. And so if you're at a church whose pastor knows the Greek, or knows the Aramaic, he studies these words and their endings. So you're preparing your children to teach the gospel, and that should be the biggest motivator for this.
Yeah. I love that. I really love that. Well, we've reached the point that we can take more of your questions. I know we've been answering some of them already. So let me pull the chat open here. And Babs, I know you've been answering some in the chat box. Could you look back through and tell me what I've missed?
So one question was the books of the Bible in the Vulgate. Like which books of the Bible? So I put Genesis, John, and Revelation. Is that right? Yeah,
it's Genesis and all the writings of John. So the Gospel of John, 1st, 2nd, 3rd John, and then Revelation.
And somebody asked about the episodes on YouTube. There was some kind of glitch this week, and so I don't think episode 3 is up yet, but it should be up by the end of this week. And then, of course, today is episode 4, so we'll get that out as soon as we can.
Episode is today 4? No, today's 5.
Oh, today's 5. Okay.
So 4 and 5 are about to go up. Yeah. Or 3 and 4, and then 5 will go up.
I think all the questions were answered.
Good.
I have a question for our audience besides Latin. I mean, definitely if you want us to do something differently on this podcast, or you're not appreciating the format, I mean, give us feedback. Obviously, this is just our 5th time. And we'll get better and better at it, I promise. But I think, gosh, you guys are doing a great job.
I definitely like hearing from other people. Like I like hearing from other tutors that are like Nicole shared, Amber shared, because like Deb and I are not experts. Like we're just lead learners also. And we just got chosen to be the guinea pigs today. So you guys know probably as much as we do. And so I love hearing from you guys because I don't know, it just feels more inclusive when you guys are sharing things that work for you and that kind of thing.
So Andrea had some good questions. Go ahead and read those, Babs.
All right, so is this designed to be for challenge A through 3 with 5 tours? Will challenge 4 have something different? I wish my upcoming challenge 2 student could do this. Love what I'm seeing so far.
Yeah, it is designed to be 5 tours, go through challenge 3. The Common Latin for challenge 4 is going to be similar to what we do now, where you're still reading the Aeneid, revisiting some of the Vulgate, and revisiting some ancient authors. And then somebody has their, Amber, you have your hand up. Go ahead.
Yeah, so 2 things. One, out of all the things we've done to teach our kids Latin, I think there's so many good reasons. But one of the biggest things is just even with traveling and living all over the country, my kids have felt confident to sit in an adult sermon and hear a pastor say something and realize, oh, they might have just used AI, or they might have just looked that up and not really know what they're talking about because they've seen some incorrect things or inconsistencies. And so it's given them a major amount of like, oh, I know how to look this up and figure out, what it meant, or just kind of, I think that's going to be very important in the days to come. And then 2, moving away from Henley, I did have a question because inside of Henley, we read a lot of the history and we talked a lot about the nature of man. So I know that we'll be using the Bible for a lot of that, but will we be encountering those things, or will we mostly be encountering some of the outside of the Bible history in more of the literature that we read? I just wondered if that was covered somewhere else or how that was being handled.
Yeah, so one of the questions we have gotten is, where's the Roman history going to be? But we have those Emperors of Rome series, and I think that's where you can go to find the some of that history that you feel like you might be missing from moving away from Henley.
And that's also the reason in challenge 4, we didn't want to drop all the ancients,
Right.
because that's when those kids are really ready to talk about the morality and the ethics of, the community. Not that they can't at a younger age, but as a group, they're usually, more articulate at that point. The other places, we are reading actually the scriptures. So if there's ever a place to discuss human nature and morality, it's going to be way better than Henley and Julius Caesar, in that case. So yeah. I'm actually sad because in the middle of Henley 2 is one of my very favorite essays of all time. And Amber, I bet you've read it based on what you said, is when Napoleon explains how no one will ever measure up to Jesus Christ. And that's an important historic moment in literature. And so keep Henley on your bookshelf and pull that speech out now and then.
Yeah, we don't ever take anything away, but it's nice to have the accountability of community. Whenever we're like diving in to things like that too, I don't know. I think it's just so cool when all the kids are having to lock in and bond over the same ideas and concepts. And I've actually heard from quite a few parents that say their kids have been on planes or in different situations where the way that progressive Christianity is going, they're meeting people that are starting to follow old gods. Like we're reading about the Greek gods, Odysseus, like it's not a real thing, but it's actually coming back up, but they're being taught on TikTok that it's beautiful and they were good. And so, I think it's important in Challenge 4 definitely to keep those ideas in there and sprinkle them in throughout. Like we should teach our kids what other religions thought, and when they come back around that they're still not true and they're still not good.
Hopefully, because the curriculum's integrated, and you're getting that in the literature, they're getting that in the philosophy, they're getting that in the science, that there's so many opportunities to talk about God's people and his world. So
That's good.
Sarah's being very patient.
Take that speech from Napoleon and plug it in somewhere into the community conversation.
Jana asks in the chat, will people without a child in one of the levels be able to purchase the curriculum? Yes. Yeah, you'll be able to do that. It'll be on the bookstore. And then somebody else has their hand up. Go ahead. Can't see your name.
Hi, Sarah.
Oh, gotcha.
I watched the intro, and I appreciate how I'm just coming out of essentials. My oldest is about to go into challenge, and so that's the only framework I have. I love how you had mentioned the tasks, like there's 6 tasks in essentials. There are 6 tasks with Latin. Is it going to be similar in the same way of how, where we do the tasks and essentials, but we only go up to like task 4 for a certain number of weeks, and then we don't even go up to task 6 until like second semester? Will that be the same, or are we doing all 6 tasks from the very beginning?
No, you'll do all 6 tasks from the very beginning, but you'll do them in with whatever you have learned, whatever skills you have under your belt. For example, when you get to task 6, which is parse and translate, if you're a first tour Latin parent, Latin student, all you're going to be looking for in that verse are some of the words that you've just studied. Just like we did with John 3:16, we didn't try to translate the whole verse. We didn't parse out every word in the verse. We just looked for those second-declension nouns. So you'll be doing that sort of thing.
Thank you. And I have one more quick question. I loved how with my first tour in essentials, my tutors were great at saying, just focus on chart A and for year 1, and then add in the other charts as you go. Will there be some sort of indication like that for Latin as well? Focus here, tour 1, 2, 3.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yeah, there is. So next week you'll see the syntax pages, and there's a syntax page there's 4 different pages, so you can progress up through them as you go through the tours. The other thing with the charts, especially when you get to the verb charts, there's over 120 forms of a verb.
Wow.
Lots of endings. And so the tour 1 students just do the indicative active. So they do this portion of the chart. And then the tour 2 students add the passive to that. And then the tour 3 students start looking at the subjunctive. So you're even year to year, you're adding to your knowledge.
Great. Thank you.
You're welcome.
What we tried to do in this curriculum was to really think about how do you spend a lifetime studying a single subject? Because that's what we'd like you to do with your Bibles. So we thought, okay, let's just get some sections of the Bible and practice how to enter in, do what you know how to do, and add a little bit more each week. So that's how it's all been designed.
Yeah, it's good. Well, are there any more questions? Any final questions?
There's nothing else in the chat. So
okay, good. This was very fun. Thank you, Deb and Babs. And,
so next week, you want me to do my ending?
Yes.
Kathy, or you?
Yes, I think we're done. I was just going to say, I think we're done.
Okay, good. So next week we're going to study task 5, studying syntax, and we're going to look at the various forms combined into phrases and clauses. And we're also talking about how family with students in several tours can study the same verse together at every level. So until then, I'm going to try again. Ora et labora. Pray and work. Leigh.
Thank you, everybody. Bye-bye.